We on? All right, well, welcome everybody. Go ahead and find your way, everyone, to your seats. Glad you made it to Apologetics on Tuesday night. Glad you guys are here. Couple announcements as you're finding your way to your seats. So Pastor Paul mentioned that we're going to start, it looks like at 6:30. That'll be sometime in September, it seems like, when we start the Adventure Club for the kids. And the purpose of that earlier start time would just be, when you have young kids, 6:30 sounds a lot less onerous than 7. If you want to take part in helping out with the kids and teaching, it should be fun. Think of it like an Awanas type thing, but a little bit more us, I guess, an us version of Awanas and stuff. But there'll still be the vests and the patches and all that. But if you want to be a part of that, talk to Pastor Trace, and that should be coming like sometime hopefully in September. So that's when we're starting. Kind of back to school is the curriculum stuff. And then kind of right now, we're just on a normal habit of what's happening throughout the week. We've got some outreach things, that are going on. There's different things in the groups. If you're not in a small group, definitely one of our life groups, definitely get into one. We'd highly recommend it. Just because we've said before that we're sort of unapologetically minimalistic. And again, that's not to be against things, but it's to free you up to be out in the world. Speaking of which, if you're ever interested, I go to the zoo on Wednesdays. You're welcome to come. I'm there usually 3:45 to like 5. And so I'm at the entrance at 3:45-ish. You want to walk around the zoo with me and some children and some other people, you're always invited. Open invitation. Some other stuff that you don't know about that's always fun. We have a soccer game that's been going on after church for about 16 years now. The location is sometimes changes, but it's at Nobel Park, and that's usually about 12:45 or so on Sunday. So there's like all sorts of like little hidden fun gems of things that are happening. We just had a bunch of the youth in the church connected at the beach last week, and they did some, like a ropes course thing and some other stuff, but it was a big hit. So there's all sorts of fun things happening, but the big one for me and for you guys is to take ownership of our own evangelism. And what that means is I'm not advocating evangelistically, that this is you guys going door to door. I'm not advocating that you guys are going up and starting conversations at the mall. I'm not advocating that you're going up to the restaurant and, getting in awkward conversations all the time. But what I am saying is everybody has like a general kind of oikos, they call it, community that you're in, right? So if you're a newer Christian, you're newer at this church, you've got lots of people that you're probably connected to. And because of the stuff we're going through in this book, the easiest people to invite to church are the people you're around. And don't be afraid of it. I mean, so many people are at this church that I've known from like jujitsu or from, the weight room or from the places I'm at, outside of this. People that I'll meet at places will come out to the church, right? People I met at a restaurant that I go to all the time. And for you guys to kind of be open to those kind of conversations, God uses it for sure. One of the challenges, how do you broach a conversation, right? I mean, if we think about the gospel, we think about what we're going to say. I think many of us were raised under this assumption that you were going to get awkward at some point. So we're hanging out, the person's cutting your hair, and they're like, how you doing? I'm like, I'm okay, but who isn't doing good? You and your soul. Let's talk about Jesus, right? I'm not asking you to make those types of changes, but what I will say is the increasing insanity of this world, you have to stop being surprised by it. You have to stop being surprised by the insanity of things. I just never imagined in my ministry, personally, that I would have a class teaching the types of subjects we're talking about right now. Things are truly absurd. It is the theater, as Francis Schaeffer called it, of the absurd, to a degree that we never thought possible. So rather than being surprised by it, recognize the opportunity it is. Things are so crazy. There's a meme I saw that showed, some guys running through the bushes. It was like a Terminator thing with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it was like what I thought the resistance was going to look like. And then this is what it actually looks like. And it just shows a family going to church. I thought, wow, it's a great meme that kind of expresses where we're at. It's interesting right now because there's such a lack of trust from your everyday, ordinary people to the big picture stuff. And I think churches, I think that we're actually, believe it or not, on the cutting edge of where churches are going to end up starting to emulate. And what I say for that is, if you look right now, no one trusts anything that's coming through media. None of us. I mean, we can manufacture crowds, we can manufacture people, we can manufacture anything. There's no authenticity. In a moment where we can have, again, a presidential candidate hasn't spoken to anybody yet, do so well, you can manufacture anything right now, and no one trusts it. And so in the past, the big thing for churches was let's have a big show and production, and everyone will be impressed by our lights and our sound and our smoke. And I think that's over. I think there's still going to be people that like all of that, but there's a craving for authenticity and realness. And that authenticity and realness is the most compelling as you guys go out as Christians boldly in the marketplace, and just don't be shy about bringing people to church. Don't be shy about telling about the gospel, about the hope that you have in you. And so be ready. So God puts you here. He will provide opportunities. My favorite evangelistic strategy is if I go into an environment that I'm not used to being in, or I just constantly, if I can remember it, is to pray, God, give me some divine appointments today, and then just look for them. God's not going to listen to you like, nah, forget you. Like, God, I'm looking for opportunities to share your gospel today. Teach me, open up the door for me somehow. Like, he's real. Just literally pray to him to do it. But I want you to take responsibility for that, because it's not my job. My job right now is you guys. You guys are my ministry. Like you're here, I'm ministering to you, and then your ministry is the people out there. As if I'm like a Chuck E. Cheese character. When you're done, I'm like, and I come back up. But regardless, that's the case. So we'll pray through that. Take ownership about your own sort of witness to people around you. None of this is a guilt-inducing thing. This is just opportunistic thinking. And then let me just pray, and we'll jump into the book. So God, thank you so much for this church. I thank you so much for just the things you've done in this church to help us to reach people with your word and your message. I pray that as people come into this church, they can see the light that it is. I pray that you would help us to be unshy about spreading the gospel, about talking about you, and give us divine appointments and opportunities to do so in Jesus' name. Amen. A couple things you can do also, just as I remind myself, you can obviously share sermons. You can make clips. There's sometimes shorts. You can share those on the internet. That's easy. It's like people read them. They watch them. One of the things we used to do that we're going to start doing again, we used to go into Pacific Beach and La Jolla, and we used to take chalk, and we would write on the sidewalks everywhere, "Who is Barabbas?" That was it. It would just be spread like graffiti the town, basically. It is totally legal. Chalk wipes off. There's nothing illegal about it. We didn't have anything else. Just said, "Who is Barabbas?" And I was like, "Who is Barabbas?" I remember I went into a CVS, and I heard someone ask someone else, "Who is Barabbas?" And I was like, it's working. And so that'll send them right to our website. But, Pastor Brett, talk to him. We're going to do stuff like that. Like, just nothing's beneath us in that respect. Like, people's souls are at stake. And so there we are. But tonight we're going to talk about this chapter 7 of the book, Strange New World, Carl Trueman. It's his truncated version of his magnum opus, really, which is called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And so I've been coming through this. We're about 60% through the book. We're flying, honestly. And it's so relevant to what we see right now. And tonight's chapter in particular is extremely relevant. I found it to be fascinating watching the Australian breakdancer humiliate her country with her breakdance. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, Google it. It wasn't like she tried hard and failed. She doesn't know how to breakdance, and she entered the Olympics, and Australia put her forth to breakdance, and she doesn't literally know how to breakdance. And at first you think, well, that's just like the country that doesn't have swimmers or water or something. No, she was a PhD. She has a PhD writing about decolonization of breakdancing from women. And basically, her PhD was a dissertation on why she's sad that women don't breakdance. And so they gave her a PhD for that, and then she went forth and humiliated her country and herself. And the problem is, it's not courageous. The big difference between courage and lack of self-awareness was crossed very highly. She doesn't know what she's doing. And it's interesting because, we talk about the sort of the diversity, equity, inclusion. We talk about the LGBTQ sort of idea of rights and feelings. And my favorite part about this, the reason I bring this up is they asked the Australian Olympic commissioner, the person in charge of all the Australian athletes, hey, what's up with Ray Gunn? That's her name, Dr. Ray Gunn, because her name's Rachel Gunn or something, and she's like, Ray Gunn? You Google it. And they said, hey, what's the deal with Reagan? She goes, she doesn't call her Reagan, she calls her Rachel, whatever. She goes, like, she's like a great person. I'm like, who cares if she's a great person? Like, you never say that about the hockey player that can't make the goal. He's a great person. She's a great person, and she really feels sad, and we just love that she feels this, and she feels that, and she feels this. And I'm like, so what? It's done. We're there. We've so gotten to this place where our feelings are authority, and it's new. And so the primary place where we see this is in the sexual revolution and the LGBTQ plus minus, sigma, the rest sign. And I want to make sure we don't miss this because it's the last two tonight that we want to talk about, the T and the Q, and really the T, adding it to the LGB, where everything changed. And so this change is so significant that and you're seeing it in our politics right now. But, the same day that we have an Australian breakdancer, breakdancing who can't breakdance, but she feels like she's entitled to breakdance, and so because she's wrote how she's a queer person, even though she has a heteronormative lifestyle and privilege. How are you a queer person that's heteronormative? That just means she's married to a man, but she's queer. Like, she's claiming victim status. Like, all of this is like her whole entitlement was putting on display, everybody, what happens when we keep propping up unimpressive people that feel strongly about things and are entitled. And this is all happening when we have a presidential race. It's an interesting moment. This chapter is huge because it deals with it. So the LGBTQ, the letters loom large in the cultural and political imagination of our day. We hear it everywhere, right? The coalition of lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer people, that's what that means, right, is without a doubt the greatest political success story of the last half century. Let me repeat that. What Trueman is telling us right now is that the coalition, it is a truly an interesting coalition of LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer people, that coalition is without doubt the greatest political success story of the last half century. So rather than thinking of this as something that's in the margins of society, I want you to understand this is the mainstream movement that we are exporting. This is what we represent. In the 1960s, homosexuality was still illegal in many Western countries. 1960s is not that long ago. Even Barack Obama did not dare to support gay marriage unequivocally until 2012. And so understand how fast, the speed with which we're at is just, you have not settled down yet. We don't understand the impact of this yet. But even today, to voice any dissent from trans ideology is likely to earn one a ferocious social media beating and exclusion from polite liberal society. The speed, depth, and comprehensive scope of the LGBTQ's triumphant cultural conquest is impressive. And so understand for a minute, there's a video of a man standing outside with a sign that says there's only men and women. And so these people upstairs in the building see it outside, and they're like, this is violence, take it down. And and they're all like, you shouldn't do it because you're white. And all the people themselves were white. And it's just like, what is happening? What is going on? And someone's like, if someone wants to, identify as trans, and the person responded like, if they identified as trans, would they identify as a man or a woman? They said, well, either one. I'm like, notice that there is no other category. Anyways, and so we kind of went into it, but the lunacy of it is it can't hold up to scrutiny, and this is where the frustration is. This is the part where like I don't want to look at media, I don't want to look at things, but I can't not. There's no answer. The problem I'm having right now is I wanted to go into apologetics. I wanted to talk to you about apologetics because I wanted to address smart arguments. And there's often, Mormonism is dumb in its argumentation. And I was like, okay, I get that. Catholicism has dumb arguments. I get that, but this isn't that. This is like nonsensical argumentation based on emotion and feeling. And so where do you argue? How do you talk to someone like that? And the answer is you can't. That's why we're going to talk about next week why the Second Amendment and the First Amendment, really the First Amendment particularly, is the key idea of limiting speech, because if you speak about these issues, there is no defense. There's none. There's zero defense. There's no argument to explain it. There isn't one coming across. And so if you want to make an argument, you think, if I can get the right argument. No. You can't open your mouth. And so I just want you to understand, that's why it's more important than ever that we are honest in our gospel conversations, that we're not focused constantly on having bigger and bigger megaphones, but we're constantly focused on the taste, touch, smell, the people around us that we are to share with. Because the gospel spread in the first century under crazy mobs, and it can do so again today. But I don't want to miss kind of what's in front of us. The argument that we could just get some BMX bike racers at the park right now and have them race, and someone hands out and has a guitar playing, and people come and listen to the gospel be preached, and you're like, hey, that's our outreach strategy. I'm like, wake up, man, wake up. That is not the case. Familiarity with the coalition can easily blind observers to its confected and volatile nature. In other words, we tend to think, this is true also in the Middle East, we tend to think here in America that if you're Muslim, you're all kind of together, that all the terrorist groups are together, but a lot of the terrorist groups hate each other, right? Hamas doesn't like Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda doesn't like ISIS. These groups don't like each other, and they're not towards one another. You have the Sunnis and the Shias. We have battles, right? They aren't all for one another. And this is true in the LGBTQ arena, and it is really important to understand that this is a coalition of convenience. There's a coalition of convenience, and you have to understand their number one, the thing that bonds them together is their opposition to you. Like literally, the entire LGBTQ plus, the entire thing that we have a thing called that, exists merely to oppose you because their views oppose one another at their very basis. They should be fighting one another, and they are behind closed doors fighting one another in their viewpoints, but they are united as a coalition 100% to oppose you. They have been united to oppose you, and I want you to understand this. It's not a movement bound together by a set of intrinsic commonalities shared by its constituent groups as, say, Republican or Democrat Party. Rather, it's a marriage of convenience created by uniquely particular circumstances. I would say the ultimate thing uniting them together is a sense of victim status. Although I don't know how many victims have Starbucks helping them come out against you to put the rainbow on stuff. But regardless, exploring this point is helpful because it not only helps us to understand the nature of the sexual revolution that we are witnessing today, and let me just rephrase, I've said this again and again, the LGBTQ movement is not a sexual revolution. It is a return, it's gravity, it is a return to humanity's paganism of Genesis 19. The sexual revolution is not new, it is literally just regressing towards our animalistic paganism. The sexual revolution has always been this book. The Bible is always where the sexual revolution has lied. We've gone to sleep and thinking of it. If you go to any high school, any college, and say that the answer for crime, the answer for poverty is abstinence until marriage, people will laugh at you, although every statistic shows this. If you wait to get married before you have kids, you tend to do better financially, your kids tend to be happier. I could go down the list. This is the revolution. This is the revolution. And so when people go back this way, I don't want to use that language, but regardless, it helps us to see what's at stake and where all this quote-unquote revolution with the LGBTQ itself might be heading and how this is going to reshape public attitudes towards traditional freedoms, and that's what we're going to get next week in particular, which is free speech and freedom of religion, right? These First Amendment ideas. So the first thing I want to understand is this first idea of a marriage of convenience. It's important to understand this because again, you don't want to just glob everyone in together. So when someone says, I'm a two-spirit, queer-thinking, heteronormative woman, like Dr. Reagan, she's in a very different space than, say, the gay man or the transgender person or in someone else. Each person's space is different, but their ideology tends to differ mainly. The first thing to note is that its different constituent members are actually divided over the very thing upon which an outsider might assume they agreed, which is the nature and status of sex. And don't miss this. This is the fundamental issue that ostensibly unites them. And what I'm trying to tell you is it does not unite them. First, look at the L and the G. Right? LG, lesbian, gay. Up until the 80s, lesbians and gay men did not even unite together. Lesbians saw gay men as enjoying male privilege. This is back in the 80s. Why? Well, a gay man in the workplace wasn't any pressure to make himself attractive to a female boss in order to impress his professional prospects. A lesbian woman, however, might find that she was required to play a distinctly feminine and even sexually attractive role in her heterosexual context for career success. So the lesbians were not stoked on the gay guys back in the 80s. So what united them all together? AIDS. The AIDS epidemic in the 80s basically had a disproportionate, devastating impact on gay men, and it transformed their image overnight from that of a privileged middle-class male engaging in self-indulgence, because that's what it is, right? What's the expression? Two married with no kids or something like what is that? DINK? What does it stand for? Double income, no kids, dinks. So you got a bunch of dinks, double income, no kids, going around doing what? We're going to Disneyland. That makes sense. Disneyland's so expensive now, so it's gay Disneyland. No offense if you like Disneyland, right? I mean, that's where you go. But basically, you have a double income, no kids. That was the idea originally. So that was the idea, that they were sort of self-indulgent, narcissistic folks, and then because they could show themselves to be victims at that point of an uncontrollable disease, it was closely connected to their sexual identity, they kind of put on the mantle of victim status here. So in the early 80s, an interesting public coalition of lesbians and gays emerged for the first time ever, focusing on presenting a united front in the campaign for AIDS research, sex ed, and the mainstream acceptance of gay and lesbian people by the wider community. This is in the 80s. Three things are noteworthy here. First, the coalition arose out of a shared sense of victimhood. This is the key. Why does a woman who gets a PhD and breakdances in the Olympics have to claim queer status? Because it's like a medal. It's like in the past, it's like saying I went to Vietnam, well, I went to war. I went to Vietnam, didn't have good status when you're in the 60s, but you get what I'm saying. It's like, oh, I won that medal, I did this thing. It is an announcement of your status, and so of course you would have that. As lesbians saw themselves as victims of heteronormative patriarchal society, so now they saw gay men as victims of the same. Let's bond together. We have an example of this idea. It's in part a function, as we mentioned, of the broader culture of expressive individualism that tilts towards seeing as virtuous any victims unable to express outwardly that which they feel inwardly. This is, again, why the left so, incongruously supports Hamas. I mean, the support for Hamas from the LGBTQ community is absurd on its face. Every single one of them would be murdered if they lived in, Iraq, Afghanistan, whatever. Like, if you sent, hey, we've got the Queers for Palestine, and they're going over there hanging out with Hamas. How long do you think, I don't know, Boy George is going to last over there with Hamas? It's not, not very well. And so it's ironic that you're going to have these folks opposing sort of Israel in this case. What unity do they have together? And Hamas is the ultimate victim group in that sense, so they can just find commonality there in the same way. It's really absurd. And to say, for example, that Hamas is in the place that it's in because they're absurdly corrupt. For example, the United States and other coalition countries had given, in the Gaza Strip, they were having bad plumbing, and we provided them the metal for pipes for plumbing. And Hamas, who was the elected government of that area, took those pipes and took the pipes that currently existed out of the ground to make rockets, to shoot more rockets into Israel. You mean to tell me that they are suffering and poor because their ideology is crap? Yes, it's exactly what it means. You can't say that. For anybody in our country, in this political sphere, to admit to that is to admit that people are responsible for their actions and that their victim status doesn't actually convey upon them. You can't do it. So no matter how absurd they are, no matter how bad their terrorism on October the 7th was, to go slaughter Jews, infants, rape women in Israel unprovoked, to go in and do that, they have to celebrate that. They cannot go otherwise. They have to celebrate the breakdancer who humiliated herself as virtuous and courageous. They have to do it. And that's the problem, is that when we nod along, you're nodding along to something you know is a lie. Second, both lesbian and gays and bisexuals assume, and this is so big, the importance of biological sex differences. To say that you're lesbian and gay and bisexual is to assume there's two sexes. The bisexual person is not saying that there's multiple sexes. There's two. It's saying there's two. The transsexual says there's many. They disagree at the very nature. I mean, when someone says, I like non-binary thinking, well, what do you say to the bisexual? That's pretty binary thinking to me. I mean, the argument doesn't work. Lesbians are biological women who are sexually attracted to biological women. Gay men are biological men sexually attracted to biological men. Bisexuals are those who acknowledge their own biological identity and their attraction to either biological sex. That's it. So you say to yourself, okay, I get that. But third, here's the key. So standing in significant tension with the second point, in allying themselves with gay men, lesbians set aside the importance of biology with its significance to them for how different sexes experience the world and relate to patriarchal society and sexual acts themselves, in order to present a common front against a common enemy, heteronormative society. Let me go back a step. The entire premise when we say heteronormative isn't something that just we say, the argument is just that's natural. We don't believe that's not evolution. The Bible prescribes one man, one woman. It's a big deal. The ultimate purveyor of heteronormative thinking is the church. The ultimate upholder of heteronormative thinking is the family. And so this group in particular came together in opposition, in overt and purposeful opposition to the destruction of these two institutions above all others, since the beginning. That's so important. In retrospect, this was a critical move because it ultimately paved the way for addition of the T and the Q to the alliance on the basis of the enemy is my friend. So here's the trans ideology, and this is where we are today. And literally, in 2016, was the first time trans ideology took on mainstream issues, because prior to that, if you remember, it was the gay baker with the cakes and it was the florist and everything else. But it was in 2016, right before Obama went out of office, that he started opening up the bathrooms to people of the different sexes that felt this way. And everyone was in there, just out of their minds about this, right? But that's when it really came into play, was really, I'd say, going into 2016, maybe 2012, something like that. Very new in terms of what we're facing now with the sheer Dylan Mulvaney in the White House. You know what I'm saying? We've come such a long way. Kamala Harris hanging out with a bearded man in a dress and makeup, calling J.D. Vance weird. It's just, the origins of the trans ideology arguably go back to the 19th century. So in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx and Engels noted that as production came to be increasingly automated, as raw physical strength, therefore became less significant in the workplace, the differences between men and women would shrink down. And of course, they were not envisaging a world where Caitlyn Jenner would be possible, but the link to technology is important. What they're saying is, you combine that with like Nietzsche's anti-metaphysical philosophy with its stress on how we ourselves have godlike power to create truth. It lends itself to the repudiation of the stable categories such as male, female, family, and the rest. Both Marx and Nietzsche proved important to the rise of gender theory. Gender theory is new in many respects. In context of the book's narrative, we might also add that the psychologizing of the self that we've described also opens the possibilities for trans ideology. I keep saying, it's not just the transgender person that uses transgender thinking. We all ourselves participate in this transgender thinking when we give authority to our feelings. And I say this again and again and again. The most radical thing as a Christian you can do is to take every thought captive to obey Christ. What does that mean? It means that your feelings are not valid because you feel them. Let me say that again. Your feelings are not valid just because you feel them. Your heart is deceitful, and so are your feelings. And so you have to ask yourself, are your feelings you and the boss of you? Because if that's the case, you are worse than an animal, and you are merely an animal. Your feelings have to follow your facts and your faith, which means husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. It doesn't say husbands feel like loving your wives like Christ loved the church. It says to do so. It doesn't say wives feel like submitting to your husband. It says to do so. Notice it's focused on behavior. Feeling follows that behavior. This is the most radical thing as a Christian we can say. And when churches pander to a feelings-oriented Christianity, all we've done is bring transgender ideology into the church without the dress and the beard. That can follow later. But as we go forward, this essentially grants the givenness of the physical body less authority than the mind in determining identity. The physical body has no telos, has nothing there. Indeed, the body is a mere instrument or raw material for realizing or expressing identity as determined by the will alone. That is a crazy idea. Of more immediate significance to our current situation, however, is the thought of Simone de Beauvoir, a French philosopher whose 1949 book, The Second Sex, is a foundational text for modern feminist theory. And so she opens the second part of that work with a dramatic and far-reaching statement. Notice what she says. She says, one is not born, but rather becomes woman. No biological, psychic, or economic destiny defines the figure that the human female takes on in society. It is civilization as a whole that elaborates this intermediary product between the male and the eunuch that is called feminine. First of all, what a stupid statement. It needs to be mocked. You need to have the wherewithal to laugh at that statement. That is an absurd statement. Look, dumb people make easy things sound hard. Smart people make hard things understandable. This is someone saying a really dumb thing and making it sound hard to understand. What she's saying is, there's no such thing as a woman, but this thing that she's calling a woman that there's no such thing as, I wish she would define what there is no, like, what is the word? No, she didn't say there's no such thing as a harumph, a harbeglock. There's no such thing as a harbeglock. What's a harbeglock? There is no such thing as a harbeglock, but there is definitely such a thing as a woman. So whatever this thing that they think she becomes, what is that thing? Could you please tell me? Pray tell. What is it? But it captures in a remarkably concise form the fundamental convictions that underlie the modern trans movement. De Beauvoir makes a distinction between biology and what we now call gender. This is the first time that there's a distinction between biology and gender. When people say that your sex is not your gender, I'm like, that's a mere assertion. That is not an argument. That is a mere assertion. That's like me saying that you're standing on the top of a turtle flying through space. I could say just the same thing as you, but I've given you no explanation of it. I've given you no argument to make that case. There's no voting. There's no debate about it. It's just asserted. The whole idea of what it is to be a woman, according to Beauvoir, is a social construct. Now, something that's not intrinsic to the female body. Now, we can say there's aspects of femininity, of course, and masculinity that does have a social element. I mean, it would be absurd not to, but they're taking an aspect of things and making it the whole thing. But to use the language of later gender theorist Judith Butler, gender is a performance, a set of behaviors that society has come to expect from those who possess a certain kind of body. Think of the offensiveness this is, though, towards feminism. The very person that puts, the feminine that puts the lesbian even, that puts a stock on living with the biology of having a uterus, right, versus the person that says it's a mere performance. And so this is what's so at stake. So right now, in the craziest sort of 1984, the Ministry of Love is the Ministry of Hate, the group think, I want you to understand this is the greatest psyops thing that I've ever seen in my life, right? So Tim Walz is a VP candidate on the left, and he's famous for putting tampons into boys' bathrooms in his state. And so people brought it up, and okay, that's absurd. If someone just simply said he's a shill who's just going along with the political winds of his dumb party, fine, just say that. But no, they're defending it, and here's how it's being defended right now. I heard one person get on the air and say, oh, he's putting on big dad energy right here. I don't even know what a big dad is, but I'm not sure what that means. Just let's go with it. So he's put on big dad energy. What does that mean? Well, it's like if you've ever been in a bathroom and you didn't have, a feminine product available, you sometimes have to use a wadded up tissue, and he's just making sure he's providing for that. Now notice the weird craziness here. No one's arguing that women should not have access to tampons in public bathrooms. Like, that's a wonderful thing for women to have access to tampons. It's a great thing. The argument is not that women shouldn't have access to it. There's no men, none, zero ever, no man ever has wondered how to deal with the blood coming out of their uterus because they don't have a uterus. It's just not something they have. But they just sidestepped the question, ignore the issue because they can't argue the issue. They can't argue the issue and say, yes, we believe men do menstruate. They have to say, well, if you identify, I'm like, the whole point, but think about this. Government money, millions, billions, however many quadrillions of dollars go into installing tampons in the men's bathroom because they're putting government money on the idea that femininity is merely a performance. That's it. Masculinity, femininity is merely a performance. Think of the audacity and the stupidity of this view, and think of the power that it has right now in the most powerful country in the world. So one of the candidates who's currently winning to become the most powerful person in the world, and the VP pick, that's their number one thing right now. This is their number one stuff. This is not some fringe issue like what have you. This represents a kind of thinking that has lost, there's no logic, there's no answer. It's mere power for power's sake. A separation in doing all this is made between the sex that's biologically determined and the gender, which is, they say, is a social contract, such that the latter floats free of any biological determination. It can be made and remade at will. You could be born biologically female, but you become a woman by learning the performances required by society. As I mentioned, there's some truth to these things, but to move from the rather obvious things that, yes, there are actual cultural things that women in this culture might differ from women in another culture, right? We would say that, right? Like, so in some cultures, like women would, I don't know, like Viking women, I'm sure, are very different than North American women, right? Like this is basically what we're saying. So femininity in that culture, where like in our culture, you are feminine when you can take a deer and slice it upwards. I'm like, I have no idea. There's an aspect to that. But to take that notion, right, and it's obvious, and then posit from that there's no such thing as gender that's attached to your body at all, like that would flunk any logic test. It's a non sequitur. It doesn't go forward. It doesn't go like why is this being legislated? Why is this the thing? The leap, the metaphysical leap, the plausibility, which depends on so many prior factors. First, inner psychology has to be granted ultimate authority in human identity. That's not true, but that's just asserted. Second, technology needs to have rendered the possibility of changing gender to be something that's actually technologically plausible. And finally, the idea, this is the big one, needed a powerful lobby group and an attractive media presence in order to help normalize the idea. Back in the day, it was will and grace, and it was to normalize the idea of homosexuality in our sort of like living rooms. And will and grace is rather quaint now. The former came from engrafting in the LGBT movement, the latter in the person of Bruce, now Caitlyn Jenner. But technology also has a big problem in this too, because in the past, you couldn't get along very well without having kids. I mean, it's just, the technology has helped us see nature as mere raw material that can be changed by acts of human will. Well, here's the problem of T, and when I say T, I don't mean testosterone, I mean trans ideology. It says the addition of T to LGB is in very real sense incoherent, as I've already mentioned. As you noted earlier, lesbians, gay men, and bisexuals all assume the sex binary of male and female is grounded in basic biology, and the point is denied by trans ideology, affirming as it does the separability of biological sex from gender. Queer ideology is similar, denying as it does the stability of the traditional categories of male and female in favor of a fluid and ever-changing range of multiple sexual identities. What they're saying is your biology doesn't matter, which completely repudiates the experience of the L, G, and the B. Nothing reveals a problem more dramatically than the personal testimony. Take, for example, the words of a lesbian living with a partner who transitioned from female to male. This is just, God help us. So this is a lesbian whose partner, which was a female, then transition to male. So does that make her what? Like if you see her with a woman with a bearded seeming man, but she knows that man used to be a female, can she still claim queer when she's getting all the heteronormative benefits now? Oh my goodness. When my partner began his gender transition, my lesbian identity, which had been central to my life and my sense of self for well over a decade, began to change. I didn't know what the transition made me. Guys, just listen to that statement for a second. I didn't know what it made me. I want to fill this room with people that consider themselves gay, transgender. I want them to come into church and repudiate their identity and take in the identity of being in Christ. That's what it means to be a Christian. A Christian is someone that puts their identity in Christ. The entire LGBTQ plus movement is trying to take them and put their identity in this movement. It is a satanic counterfeit. It is offering a salvation that is not true. And so this person's like, what do I do with my identity? I'm like, your identity? What in the world? Some people told me I was obviously still lesbian, but it was just as obvious to others that I was now straight or bisexual. It wasn't obvious to me at all, and I struggled with it for a long time. Now I've been the partner of a trans man for as long as I was a lesbian. And I've gotten comfortable just not having a name for what I think I am. I think of myself as part of the family of queers and trans people. I'm like, I don't know, who was the second president of the United States? Like, what do you think of, like, what's one, like, what are you spending all your time thinking about this? This woman's situation is a painful example, though, of the confusion that fluid gender ideologies and trans ideology leave in their wake. When her female partner transitions to being a trans male, she still feels that she's a lesbian. She's sexually attracted to other women, but for her to assert this is to deny her partner's claim to be a man. It's dark. This is a dark thinking, right? However she affirms her partner's maleness, she has to deny her own identity as a lesbian. In the end, she settles for being queer, a conveniently fluid and rather vague term that avoids the problems created by trying to think in binary terms about transgenderism. Now, not all homosexuals are willing to be as accommodating to this woman. Andrew Sullivan, a gay man, and an exceptionally sharp-witted, insightful journalist, made the following comment in New York Magazine in February of 2019. Notice what he says as a gay man. It is not transphobic for a gay man not to be attracted to a trans man. Okay, so you understand what he just said. It's not transphobic for, I hate the word phobic, whatever. It's not transphobic for a gay man not to be attracted to a woman who has gone through sex change as a man, or is dressed like a man. It's close to definitional. The core of the traditional gay claims that there's indeed a very big difference between male and female. The difference matters, and without it, homosexuality would make no sense at all. If it's all a free and fluid non-binary choice of gender and sexual partners, a choice to have sex exclusively with the same sex would be not an expression of our identity, but a form of sexist bigotry, would it not? Sullivan's far from a lone voice in this. In February 2021, Brian Quinn, who's co-owner of Camp Boomerang RV Park and Campground in Orleans, Michigan, found himself at the center of a storm because campground is for gay men, and he said that he wasn't going to be welcoming biological females to the site, no matter how they identified in terms of gender. Wow. In short, trans men who were sexually attracted to men were not welcome. This post earned him a storm of criticism for his transphobic policies. Do you understand? Like, we don't get to hear stories like this. Other gay men have faced similar criticisms for saying that as gay, I hate this, but they do not find trans men to be sexually attractive. But here's the point of all this. Why am I telling you this? The destabilization of gender categories that trans ideology and queer theory demand stands in opposition to any category built upon the biological sex binary, straight, gay, lesbian. In short, anyone who believes that the sex binary is important is vulnerable to accusations of transphobia. No, okay, let me say this. Schaeffer said it this way. He said, during the 1900s and before this, all the way back to the Enlightenment and whatnot, art became anti-art. Anti-art is basically me putting up something that's crappy as a piece of art and daring you to say it's not art. Like, when I put a toilet seat and hang it on a wall next to Picasso, I'm daring you to say that that toilet seat is not art because I'm basically doing a giant says who. I'm daring you. When I take music that's just crap and I try to elevate it, when I'd have long periods of like 30 minutes of silence and a note, and then another 30 minutes of silence and a note, and then like 3 notes disjointedly, and someone says, it's really deep. They're daring you to say, nah, because they're going to say, says who? So when the breakdancer came out, she's actually an anti-breakdancer because she's challenging your notions of saying, oh, you say this isn't breakdancing? Says who? I'm decolonizing the idea that you get to own what breakdancing is. That's what this is. It is deconstruction through inclusion, so it means everything, and it's the deconstruction of words. Jesus himself is called the Word of God. God began everything with the Word. This is the most satanic philosophy that you can get to. Trans ideology often goes against feminism. Obviously, the difficulty relating to T to the L, G, and B finds a parallel in the response of feminists to trans movement. Feminism is now bitterly divided between those who affirm trans women as true women and those who repudiate such, seeing them as men who are trying to deny the male privilege that has been their invisible birthright and steal false identifications with female victimhood. There should be nothing more offensive to any feminist than a man dressing up and acting in a typically women's fashion. That is literally stereotyping women. Dylan Mulvaney, when he says he feels like a woman, it says, I want to go shopping and do this. I'm like, you just totally minimized women to merely being people that like to shop. You've just traded in only and mere stereotypes. And every feminist worth her salt should be up in arms and not supporting that. To support that is really to literally undercut everything you've said. And here's the problem. So many people are willing to undercut it because they all hate Christ. And they're willing to join with anyone else, and they'll undercut their entire social identity to hate Christ along with others. But some are sticking to their guns. One of them is they're called TERFs, or trans exclusionary radical feminists. It's a pejorative term that's intended to marginalize those who object to the increasingly dominant orthodoxy regarding sex and gender. So two leading feminist thinkers of TERFs are Janice Raymond and Germaine Greer. Some other people, I think, was it not Chris Rock, but someone else called himself a TERF comedian. What's his name? That guy. Chappelle said he's a TERF, and so is J.K. Rowling. She calls herself a TERF, and now Harry Potter and Hermione and stuff are against him, against their own person that made them a living and made them famous simply because they're TERFs. I mean, just people are such cowards. They're such cowards. Anyways, they basically say, look, your chromosomes matter, no matter how you dress, no matter what you do. They're making the argument we're making. But here's the thing. Our argument needs to be more than your chromosomes. Our argument needs to be more than this. Our argument needs to go back to the design. Design. There's a purpose for us. And we repudiate design when we stop talking about design, when we deny it in our own lives in other ways. Does that make sense? Like, we deny it in other ways. We start saying, oh, design doesn't matter in other ways. And say, okay, so I'm heterosexual and I'm married to a woman, but if I'm effeminate in my marriage, like, I'm denying the fact that I have a role. Now, what does that mean to be effeminate in my marriage? How about not trying to provide? Not trying to take care of things, not trying to protect, not trying to lift up, to lay myself down, to wash my wife with the word of God, not to lead in the home spiritually. To do those things, welcome to your trans ideology. The bearded women are outside. They're waiting for you to go hang out. I mean, that's basically us. What Raymond in this one quote is saying is that sex and gender are not the same thing. Right? They say biology is still a vital part of being a woman because it shapes how a woman experiences the world. Menstruation, for example, is a distinctly female experience, not according to Tim Waltz. It's a distinctly female experience that has both economic and physical consequences for women, from which men are exempt. And I'm so glad I'm exempt. That sounds terrible. It seems like women always have a problem for 3 out of the 4 weeks of the month. It sounds terrible. I'm so glad I don't have to deal with that. I just have to carry the weight of knowing I can repopulate the world on my shoulders. But other than that, being a man is really way easier than a woman. I don't have a uterus. I can't grow a baby in me. I'm just a barbarian meant to protect that. I mean, that's it. That's my life. Not anymore. You're not even a mother anymore. You're just a breastfeeding person, a menstruating person. Oh, my goodness. It's taken away the very, essence of the very things that God designed. God, the most beautiful, it's so offensive. The most beautiful thing in the world, in so many ways, is motherhood. Now, if you can't have kids, that's a tragedy. We get that's a tragedy. Not like that doesn't mean everyone should be not liking kids, but if you can have kids, think about what happens when a sperm meets an egg. A soul is created. A human being who is distinct from you, who will one day live for eternity, whether in heaven or in hell, is made. That's an amazing thing. A woman walks around and nurtures an entire human being in her womb for 9 months while she's just going around shopping and walking around with the stuff. She's doing her thing, with a baby that's going to come and squeeze out through, her private parts, but I don't know, taking a watermelon through a straw. And then she's going to make sure that the baby can eat by drinking food from her body. Nothing comes off my body that you want to eat. There's nothing that anyone would get nurture from on my body. But women literally are walking around with nutrients in their body. You can buy colostrum, men, if you want to work out, but it's actually from animals, don't worry. But still, this is amazing. And what do? The culture this is so how satanic it is. It's minimized that to not even calling them mothers. Not even making it something that you were born with. And so all the pain, all the things you go through, no, it's just the pregnant people, that guy with the beard, he got that too. He needs tampons in his place. It's performative, and it's so offensive. If Christ doesn't come back, there has to be a backlash to this. There has to be. But some object to this point that all women menstruate or conceive, they say, and this is obviously stupid. You have to make people say that men menstruate. It's just so absurd. I think there's an emoji now with a bearded man with a belly. I don't know. But here's the whole thing. The denial that a woman's physical constitution is significant for who she is like denying that the color of an African-American woman's skin is irrelevant to her identity in relationship to herself in the world, isn't it? This should alert us to the logic of the argument upon which trans ideology depends, because it assumes that the body is not of primary relevance to gender identity. It consequently excludes bodily considerations from the definition of what it means to be a man or a woman. But notice, this is a circular argument. The conclusion is already contained in its premise, and it becomes clear in the storm of protests surrounding J.K. Rowling's comment that there must surely be a word for people who menstruate. Too bad there isn't one. Apparently she was a bigot for saying that, and a transphobe for daring to offer a narrative of womanhood that involved biology. Trans ideology really rests upon a psychological definition of what it means to be a woman. Now, if you're a feminist, you should be offended that the woman of the year is a man. The best female athlete is a man. Germaine Greer made the point in the character's pungency in her 2015 on the Victoria Derbyshire show. Never heard of her. I've asked my doctor to give me long ears and liver spots, and I'm going to wear brown coat, but that won't turn me into a blanking Cocker Spaniel. Physical and chemical gerrymandering of the male body does not make it female. You can remove genitalia, you can inject oneself with female hormones, but every cell of the female body has 2 X chromosomes. At best, you're just a cosplayer, and you want everyone to play along. And when you play along, you perpetuate the lie. I'm not telling you have to go out there with a sign or this and that, but again, I'm going to make this really clear. Pronouns do matter. Do not go with it. God has to be the person that defines male and female, not that person. They are not God. And when someone says, will you use my proper pronouns? I'm like, you're not God. You don't define your pronouns. Only God does, and you're not it. And go to jail, lose your job. Please, this is one area you can fight. Don't let your kids do it. Don't do it. Greer also offers a cultural critique of trans ideology, seen in a very real sense as resting upon the idea that gender can be learned. Again, the transsexual is identified as such solely on his or her own script, which can be as learned as any sex-type behavior and as editorialized as most autobiographies usually are. This is why so many people are all of a sudden identifying as trans today. So when I was at Knott's Berry Farm a couple months ago, there was a man proudly walking around with a dress on. And I'm supposed to be like, oh, that's so normal. That's what the dare is. It's the dare. It's like, I dare you to look at me and not think it's normal. I dare you to look at me and not hide your kids' faces. I dare you to look at me and not be like there's something wrong. In fact, the very presence of me trying to have you accept it, would you come up to someone that's just casually walking around with a decapitated head? We'd be like, oh, that's cool. We wouldn't, ostensibly, unless we were in a cannibalistic tribe, I guess, but you're like, oh, dinner. But otherwise, right? So the very idea that we're supposed to be okay with that. Hey, should I go to my friend's gay wedding? I'm like, would you go to your friend's public murder? Or are you saying it's a sin to do it? I'm like, I don't know. Are we so dumb that we can't, I'm spicy tonight. I'm just so tired of dumb Christians being so dumb. Stop it, right? Can we stop it? I'm not, and I love it. Just anyone that thinks it's hateful, there's nothing, bring them on. They're just I identify as right. How about that? The conceptual language, though, is shifting from fixed identities rooted in sex binary toward more psychological and therefore plastic terms, right? Sexual orientation and gender identity. And it's as these have become embodied in law that the implications of all of this, the LGBTQ plus movement, becomes clear and unavoidable. Now, this is where things get so gnarly. Sexual orientation and gender identity, what's called the Yoga Carta principles. Around the world, governments are framing all this, sexual orientation and gender identity, SOGI, laws in relation to the Yoga Carta principles named after the Indonesian city where they were formulated in 2006. It's a foundational text connecting LGBTQ rights to the concept of human rights in general. Now, here's what should make you upset. Civil rights in this country came about because people were truly treated and mistreated in every way, right? Slavery was a true evil that we have to repudiate. To equivocate that to a man wanting to dress up in a dress and feel oppressed because he's not celebrated should give you so much offense. There is no person that I can imagine that, I don't understand how those go together. That should offend everybody. I don't even know. I've lost my ability to be offended, I guess, or to be outraged, maybe. This is a foundational text, though, as I said. Neither groups that formulated the original principles, the International Commission of Jurists and the International Service of Human Rights, has official government status. It's just a bunch of yahoos that got together and said, we declare. I'm like, who cares? But numerous countries around the world have adopted the principles of the Yoga Carta such that it's fair to say that wherever sexual orientation and gender identity enjoys legal protections, in those places, one can discern the underlying influence of this group. So here's a bunch of nobodies who acted like they have authority, just like that happened during COVID, and everyone listened to them. You see what happens when we deny that the Word of God has authority? We're just we're called the Yoga Carta people. We're like, great, okay, sure, what do we do? Tell me how I can, do reparations. What do I need to do? From the opening paragraph, the principles of what they wrote or underlying convictions are clear. Here's a quote. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Oh, it sounds like you're stealing some of this. All human rights are universal, interdependent, indivisible, and interrelated. I'm starting to lose this a bit. Okay, interdependent, indivisible, and okay, fine. Okay. You got me. I agree with you somewhat. Okay, let's go on. Sexual orientation and gender identity are integral to every person's dignity, and humanity must not be the basis for discrimination or abuse. We found a place of disagreement. So they're saying that this is the main thing that gives you identity is your sexual identity. So to discriminate against that is discriminate against you. The text goes on to deplore violence against individuals who deviate from heterosexual norms and points an accusing finger at governments that police sexuality and thereby encourage and promote cultures where gender-based violence and inequalities are rife. And this is emblematic of the logic of sex and oppression that we noted earlier from the thoughts of Wilhelm Reich and his followers. It's the logic of the sexual revolution just applied internationally. It's not a surprise, therefore, to see these principles assume as basic a sexualized form of expression individualism as normative to the definition of what it means to be human. They say, here's their preamble. It says, understanding sexual orientation refer to each person's capacity for profound emotional, affectional, and sexual attraction to and intimate and sexual relationships with individuals of different gender or the same gender or more than one gender. I'm like, ugh. Understanding gender identity, this is they're quoting them, to refer to each person's deeply felt internal and individual experience of gender, which may or may not correspond with sex assigned at birth, including the personal sense of the body, which may involve, if freely chosen, modification of bodily appearance or function by medical, surgical, or other means, and other expressions of gender, including dress, speech, and mannerisms. This is a nonsense statement. It's a nonsense statement. Notice, you can't have the definition of your word in the definition. They say their understanding of gender, their experience of gender, which doesn't correspond to birth. What in the sense is it? Notice three things here. First, the idea of sexual orientation has no content. There's no content to it. This is why Matt Walsh's video, What's a Woman? Watch it if you haven't watched it. Look, the guy's a comedian. He's funny, but he nails it. He nails it. It's simply, though, in this case, defined by subjective desire. I desire to be a woman. I'm like, what is that thing you desire? The moment you define it, you're not it. Second, gender is separated from biological sex, and psychology, in this case, trumps biology. The language is that of inner feelings, individual experience, and personal sense. And you say to yourself, that's absurd. Well, how do you read the Bible? When you come into church and I say something and you don't feel like it's right, what's your first sense? To disagree with me or to place yourself with fear and trembling under the Word of God? Do you think and identify more with the trans ideology? You might do that more than you think. The person's own feelings are given such authority that it's hard to see how any person might challenge an individual's view of their own identity without being immediately liable to accusations of oppression or worse. There's so many people that think I'm mean. I'm nice. When I say something that this says, how is that rude? If I say it says this, I don't condemn people. I'm like, here's what it says. I'm under the same thing as you. If a Christian doesn't like what I say because they feel like it's harsh or it's mean, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, when you buy a car, the contract isn't like, hey, bud, how's it going? Like, he exists. Sin exists. Guilt is real. There's a forensic quality to it. You have to understand what it is, right? Like, that's the real. It was like, I just don't feel like that. Like, who cares? Third, and following from this is sex is assigned at birth is entirely separable from gender, okay? So that's kind of what they say. But where these radically subjective identities become problematic is in the rights that the Yoga Carta principles attaches to them. Listen to this. Principle 3 states the following. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. What about people in the womb? Okay. Persons of diverse sexual orientations and gender identities shall enjoy legal capacity in all aspects of life. Now, there's something just logically inconsistent here that I don't want to get into it. So each person's self-defined sexual orientation and gender identity is integral to their personality and is one of the most basic aspects of self-determination, dignity, and freedom. Whew. In plain terms, we're not done with the quote, but in plain terms, this calls for societies to recognize that as a firm support, protect, and even celebrate whatever subjective sexual identity any individual cares to affirm for themselves. Now, we're going to get to this next week, but right now in England, they just passed some law that if you post something that's considered hateful towards this ideology, you can literally go to prison right now. And they're not joking around. They mean it. because that's hate speech. It's hate to say that there's two genders. It's hate. They're saying it's hate to say that 1 + 1 = 2. I mean, like, are you kidding me? But perhaps the most fascinating of the Yoga Carta principles, however, is principle 24, the right to found a family. Now listen to this. Remember I mentioned deconstruction through inclusion? Here it says, everyone has the right to found a family regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. All right, look, having a family, you have a right, it's a privilege, but maybe you can't get pregnant. Maybe you don't get married. You don't then have a right to have a family. That's how it's always been. It's a blessing to have a family. They're saying everyone has a right to, as if families, listen to this, families exist in diverse forms. No family may be subjected to discrimination on the basis of the sexual orientation or gender identity of any of its members. This is nonsense. How do you even have a family if you don't have a mother and father? But, oh my goodness, but in this statement, so many factors come together. First, listen to this. The whole notion of a right to found a family is super interesting because there's no rationale for it. This is blah. Everyone has a right to Gatorade. Like, we can say whatever we want. It's got what plants crave. No rationale for this right is given. But it seems safe to assume that the authors regard having a family as a key step in normalizing non-heterosexual sexual identities. But here it is. To claim that having a family is a right is therefore, listen to this, this whole claim is therefore to turn the family into a therapeutic phenomenon, something that exists primarily to make the parents feel good. This is the most selfish, narcissistic statement. Everyone has the right to be affirmed and do everything they want. And again, nothing encapsulates this better than the stupidity of the dumb breakdancing from Dr. Reagan in the Olympics. Again, on display is this ideology and its dumbness. Everyone has a right to be celebrated. You don't have a right to be celebrated. You're bad at breakdancing. You need to be told that. Why? Like, if you have a problem with me saying this, like, repent. I don't even know what to say. Like, this is just bad. But second, the fact that men and women need each other to make babies is a fact of nature, while the definition of a family has changed over time as its core has always followed along the tracks of biological stuff. But what the principle assumes is that technology has overcome natural limitations of human procreation, thereby turn the family into another institution that can be redefined to meet the therapeutic needs of the moment. This, like, transgender thinking is the same as like socialism and communism. It's just a parasite upon capitalism. Every country that can have socialism that actually can last for more than like a couple years lasts because they had at one point some sort of capitalistic endeavor. Hong Kong is holding up China. I mean, you can get down to you get what I'm trying to say. It's parasitic. None of that, like, if you put a bunch of gay people on an island, it will be extinct in like 45, 50 years. Period. No matter how much you want it to be otherwise. You need families. And you can deny it all you want. The dirty little secret of the whole trans movement is you need families. The authors go on to assert that states will take all necessary measures to ensure access to adoption and assisted procreation. That the state needs to take an interest in this. Now, notice how crazy this is. What their nature has declared impossible, that two men or two women might conceive a child together, technology has made possible, and what technology has made possible, the sexual revolution has made an imperative. Third, we see the logical sleight of hand with regard to trans ideology. Again, the principle asserts that families have existed in diverse forms. That's true. Like, therefore, trans families are real. Like, that's a non sequitur. One doesn't go from the next. To use moderate diversity of family structures to justify naming any favored social arrangement as a family is to eviscerate the term of any meaningful content. What is it? Deconstruction through inclusion. Language has to matter to us. We are people of the word. The Lord prayed for us. Set them aside in truth. Your word is truth. Words matter. Definitions matter. Please stop just giving away things. When someone says it's just semantics, I'm like, well, then so is the Bible. The Bible's not a book of feelings with semantics on top. Words matter. They have to matter in our faith. If they don't matter in our faith, then why would they matter in your politics? And guys, when I say this, I want you to make this really clear. If you show up at a church that's all premised on building sentiment and feeling, words don't matter. If you think something's more important than the Word of God, words don't matter. But this move parallels out, which uses the diversity of what femininity and masculinity mean across different cultures in order to deny any significance of biological sex at all. It's absurd argumentation. An aspect of truth is made into the whole truth, and the result is an unassailable ideological position that presupposes that evidence that might count against it is by its definition inadmissible. Listening to journalists try to shut down X or Twitter with Elon Musk and Donald Trump is all done under the auspices from journalists of it, quote unquote, being dangerous speech. The trans issues become the most pressing and intrusive aspect of the LGBTQ plus transformation of society. Yes, while gay marriage has created problems for Christian florists, cake bakers, it's arguable that most of us haven't found it to impinge uncomfortably upon our lives in any obvious way, but trans ideology is absolutely different. Make no mistake. What I'm trying to say is what you're facing right now is just not a fringe issue. It's not just a matter of you walking past the female bathing suits for kids with the tuck section to tuck your wiener in for if you want to pretend like you're a girl. Like, I can just walk past that. All right? Well, the reason I'm saying this is because so much of traditional society has been shaped by the assumed reality of the gender binary that we believe in. From school bathroom facilities to sports to prisons to hospital wards and beyond, the basic definition of male and female is all pervasive. It shapes notions of privacy and safety. It has historically informed ideas of good manners and decorum, of modesty and public behavior. Right? So if I go to the beach and I take my shirt off, that's relatively okay. But if my wife takes her shirt off, that's whoa, 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 we're not in France. When the binary comes to be seen as a mere social construction designed for the purpose of oppression, everything must change. What do they say? Free the nipple. A bunch of people dancing, gyrating down the street and telling you, how dare you put your beliefs on me. And such a change will be impossible for anyone to avoid or ignore precisely because it has such serious implications for the public spaces and even for the relationship of parents, children, and state. You cannot literally have had a company trading publicly due to BlackRock and others coming in to saying if you don't have a DEI board in some way, you cannot trade publicly at your company to a certain degree. I think it was Florida, somewhere else, that made a law saying that you can't enforce that DEI inclusion to trade on the public trading, and at that time Biden overturned it with a veto, said, nope, you need to have this. So if you didn't identify, if you didn't have like a two-spirit transsexual lesbian on your board, you couldn't sell, I don't know, detergent. But let me go on here. In a significant Supreme Court case in 2020, so 2020, if you haven't remembered, like you guys, every single one of you in here were alive in 2020, so you watched this. Bostock versus Clayton County, the court decided by a 6-3 majority that Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act applied to trans individuals. Because that's crazy. That's with our conservative justices. Title VII was originally intended to protect people, i.e. women, in the workplace from discrimination on the basis of sex. By applying Title VII to trans individuals, the Supreme Court basically accepted the detachment of gender from biological sex and granted legal status to an inner psychological conviction of those who believe themselves to be men trapped in the bodies of women or women trapped in the bodies of men. Trans ideology was thus confirmed as the law of the land when it came to matters of employment. So here's what's so funny. Feminists used to call God her all the time. When she does this, I'm like, how dare you misgender him? He already told you his preferred pronouns. Just saying. Well, now they're saying that any of this, your preferred pronouns, they enshrine into law for employment. If you go against it, that's considered, you could go to jail. The author of the majority decision, Justice Neil Gorsuch, was careful to stress that this ruling was narrowly focused upon the workplace and not to be seen as having immediate relevance beyond that. Just like gay marriage was just going to affect gay men, not polygamy, not transgenderism, not NAMBLA, not pedophiles, of course, as all this is coming down the line. Within hours of his inauguration, so of course, once the trans ideology has legal status in one area, it's hard, even perhaps unreasonable, to keep it confined there. Literally within hours of his inauguration as president, Joe Biden, within hours, signed into law an executive order preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. So no one voted for this. He just signed it into law. Among other things, this order required public schools to open women's restrooms and changing rooms to biological men identifying as women. Women's sports, too, must be open to biological men. In short, it took the underlying philosophy of Justice Gorsuch and applied it to the area of education, citing Title VII as it did so. So if your daughter is a boxer, which some people are like, why is your daughter a boxer? I'm like, feminism. And then she gets punched in the face with a man with an Adam's apple claiming to be a woman. Boo-hoo for you. What this means is that trans ideology now has a grip on the law in such a way that it is going to be impossible to avoid. This will affect your life. If you employ people, if you work with people, if your children go to public schools, you are going to find the trans question pressing upon you. It's no longer sufficient to plead individual moral scruples with regard to these things any more than that is deemed acceptable in matters of racial segregation. Trans rights are now considered civil rights in our country, and those with principled objections have no obvious recourse by which they might protect themselves. Let me say this again. There's nothing you can do civilly to protect yourself from the laws that will condemn you for opposing transsexual identity. All you have left is the First Amendment, which they're trying to take away. Carried consistently to women's sports will be soon to be a thing of a past. Given the typical disparity of strength between male and female athletes, will have an impact on many young women who depend on athletic scholarships to fund their education. More tragically, young girls and boys at school now find that the one place they might have expected society to work hard to grant them privacy and protection, school restrooms, are the very place where society has not simply abdicated its responsibility, it has actually created a legal culture opposed to such. Our current VP running right now, this is like one of his main things, and the same applies to women's prisons. Trans ideology increasingly shapes corporate policies. The banning of Ryan T. Anderson's calm, thoughtful, and well-researched book, When Harry Became Sally, by Amazon in February 2021 was interesting because they left Mao, Hitler, and Stalin as authors in good standing. Somehow Anderson had committed a more serious crime in the modern therapeutic world. He had challenged the dominant narrative of a trans revolution and called into question whether it was really delivering on the promises it made. Amazon's like, that's just a bridge too far. Mein Kampf? Yeah. That's okay. The Communist Manifesto? Cool. That's okay. Men are men and women are women. Get rid of it. That is hateful, bigoted stuff. Now, you might say the banning of Anderson's book, like the Bostock ruling and the Biden executive order, have implications for all of us. Amazon is a vice-like grift on book sales. A book denied a platform as Amazon is likely not to go anywhere. It's not old-style censorship by governments of a kind that characterized the Soviet Union. It's censorship via private corporation, economic power, but it's censorship nonetheless, here in the service of trans ideology, but with potential implications for anything with which Amazon executives care to disagree. I love Amazon, but I mean, I'm not prepared to boycott Amazon over this because people need Christ. Amazon needs Christ. I still want to get my stuff by tomorrow. But I don't know, maybe if you start a better company, I'll go to it. I don't know what to say. I love Amazon. And I use Kindle for my book, so I guess I can't read that book now. Look at what they did to me. But more seriously, the sexual revolution of the LGBTQ is fascinating. I'm ending right here. Because it represents the outworking of sexualized, expressive individuals in public life. So everything we set up to this point had seemed academic. Now all that stuff they said was academic literally will affect you, but more importantly, it will affect your children, and it will definitely affect your grandchildren. And let me just say this. It doesn't matter who you vote for. You're going to be affected by this. If Trump wins, this issue is going to, you might do better in your economy. It'd be great to have cheaper gas. You're still going to deal with all this. Like, the church has to be the church. And the church can't be the church when it's like gazing at its own navel and celebrating how it feels. More significant than all the things we just said, however, is the fact that these radical forms of expressive individualism, allied to powerful narratives of victimhood and oppression, are set to change all our lives because it's basically given the Marxist ideology its tools to oppress for real. And Marxism has caused death of millions of people around the world. I just want you to understand that where these Marxist ideologies come forth, I mean, death follows in its wake. We've defined the issue. It's up for grabs. It's not good. So let me ask you this tonight. I just want you to think about this. As a Christian, compassionately wanting to share the gospel, how will you stand firm in your belief system? And I'm going to ask you to do something right now. If you want to learn about self-defense, let me give you a tip, and then I'll talk about this. In self-defense, you have to define when you'll fight. If you can define that now, if you are a concealed carry permit person, you have to know when if you're going to draw your gun, you have to be willing to shoot. Basically the idea. You don't brandish your weapon. If you've never decided when you're going to actually fight, you're going to lose. You'll get beat up. So the first thing you teach someone when we teach self-defense is you're like, okay, if I feel uncomfortable, I need to come up with some kind of line that I've already determined, even if I'm not sure how I feel, totally, if I'm a little uncomfortable, and then that person, I say something and they cross whatever line that is, I go. No thought, no waiting, no time of like going what they call the OODA loop, where I go back and go through feedback and I freeze and like, am I in a fight right now? I get hit. Here's where the line is. As soon as I just go. No adrenaline, I just go. That's how you do self-defense. If you want to know, that's a tip. Isn't that great? All right, let's go back to this. If we're going to be apologists for the word, you're being ambassadors for Christ, and you know that 100% the world is set against you, let me just say this. Decide tonight, while you're in bed, while things are fine, hoping that things go in a good direction again. But let me just ask this. Make a decision, the line you're going to draw, where you're willing to lose your job, where you're willing to lose your friends, where you're willing to take and be put into pain. if you don't draw a line and if you don't find a hill to die on, you might find that there's no more hills left. Let me pray. God, I'm spicy tonight. Please use it nonetheless. I'm so tired, Lord. The lies are so humiliating. They're humiliating. Listen to people morally preening as they murder babies. Morally preening as they break down every bit of your word. Lord, I understand imprecatory psalms like this. I've gotten just a glimpse of what sin looks like, and I hate it, and I can't believe your patience. But Father, if you were just, I would be condemned. 2, I'm not more righteous than any other person. I thank you for your gospel. Lord, you've called me not to be a vigilante of justice. Justice is yours. You are coming, and you will make it all right, and you will vindicate your church. Help me have compassion and recognize how much you have forgiven me so that I can still share your word with people. But Father, as I share your word, help me not to be a pushover. Help me not to be just a pandering shill, just wanting everyone to like me. Help me to love people enough to have them not like me as I tell them the gentle, loving, but real truth. Father, help me to be willing to be condemned, willing to be spat upon and said horrible things about, knowing that you are the true audience. Help me not to think of the people that are in these ideologies as my enemy. Father, but for your grace, all of us would be there right now. So many of us in this room, myself included, have thoughts that allow the same kind of thinking in our lives unexamined. And when that comes across our own thinking, when we go about our lives and see ourselves putting our feelings and the authority of those feelings above what your word says, help us to stop in our tracks, to have our breath come out of us. Help us to remember these truths and help us to cling to your word as a light, as a lamp in a dark place. Help us to take every thought captive to obey Christ. And Father, use us to fill this place up with people that are hearing your word. Father, help us to understand the impact of your word upon the culture and the people around us. Help us to see them and open up divine appointments to share the hope that we have in you. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we'll see you next week.
Pastor Matt Smith, Senior Pastor of Barabbas Road Church. For the past 16 years, it has been my joy to equip the saints for the work of the ministry by preaching the Bible verse by verse, line by line, the whole counsel of God. Our audio and video messages have reached over 158 countries and are listened to by over 5,000 people each week. Many of you who listen weekly have been through our doors, and I'm thankful that you continue to use us as a resource for your enrichment and edification. We consider you all a part of our extended church family. As you know, San Diego is a spiritually dark and financially difficult place to exist as a local church, and yet, by God's plan and purpose, He's placed us here to boldly challenge the false faith by teaching that Jesus is the only way, truth, and life. My desire is that we would continue to be a bastion of light in this dark area, that we would keep bringing you consistent biblical teaching on a weekly basis. To that end, I'm asking that you would prayerfully consider partnering with us in your missions giving. To do so, go to Barabbas.com/give. I'm thankful for this task and look forward to our partnership for years to come.